Hey there, wargamers and hobbyists, Justin the Arm Painter here, and today we're going to be working on an Eldar Skyrunner. For today's tutorial, we're going to be working on an Eldar Craft World Skyrunner, but before we can actually start laying down some paint and working on this bad boy, we've got to get him out of this clamshell. So here we go. And just like that, our Eldar Skyrunner is out of the package, and it looks like we've got a couple different bits here, specifically looking at the two helmet options. So we've got this one, and then we've got this one with a little fin on the back, and we've got two different weapon options for our Warlock, or whatever HQ happens to be riding around on this Skyrunner. But with the bits kind of shown and trying to determine what we're going to do, the next thing for us to do is to assemble this model. And just like that, all the bits have been cleaned and removed from the sprue, and boy, this snapping thing's getting a little bit out of hand. Next thing you know, I'm going to snap and these things are going to be assembled. Let's try. Well, I can't believe that worked, but he is now assembled. So with the cinematography effects aside, I've gone ahead and masked off his flight stand here because I want to have something to mount him on that I can hold to do all the airbrushing we're going to be doing in the future. So masking this off, it allows me to be able to put the peg underneath him, get him mounted to something so I can spray and not lose the clear nature of the actual flight stand. And I went ahead and mounted his helmet onto this little stick here. It's just an old paintbrush that I snipped and glued him on top of so that I could actually get at the helmet and airbrush it without having to worry about this stuff here. Now, I do want to come in and lay down some blue colors on this and mask them off, and by keeping the head separate, I'll be able to get in here on his shoulder pads and things like that without having to do extra work with the masking. So I think we're going to be prepping this guy here for some primer, and for that we're going to be working with a couple today. So we've got three different Stynal Res primers from Badger. So we've got their Stynal Res White, we've got their Stynal Res Brown, and we've got the Stynal Res Black. These are all really great through an airbrush, but you can use whatever primer you would like. And we're also going to be having to do this in a couple different stages because I want to put some blue stripes across the front of his little jet bike here, and I want to have these little square pieces on his fins to remain blue, which will break up all the yellow since we're working on an Iandan paint scheme here. For that, we will be coming in with some blue paints from Minotaur, which would be Royal Blood and Lagoon Blue. After that, we're going to be coming in with some yellow, but let's get this primer laid down first, and then we can begin. To get things started, we're going to be coming in with our Stynal Res Black first, and we're going to be laying down a coat of this to prime the whole surface. For that, we're also going to be using our Badger Renegade Chrome today. Any airbrush will do, so long as it's one you're comfortable with, but this is the one I've got on hand, and it's the one I'd like to work with. As a good rule of thumb, I always like to start by spraying on the back of my hand first, make sure we're getting the paint coming out, there's nothing left over from previous sessions, and just better to mess up the back of a glove than to mess up a model. But I'm pretty reasonably happy with this. It's just a straight black primer, so let's go ahead and prime this whole surface. Now, he is mounted on a stick here, so you don't want to lay this flat straight down on the surface. So one of the things I like to do is save some of my old pluck foam and use it for things like this, that I can push that down in there and hold them up. Now we're going to give this a moment to dry, and then we're going to come back in and do a Zenithal highlight with our white primer. Now that these two pieces are sufficiently dry, we can come in and lay down our white primer. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm about to do, what I'm doing is called Zenithal highlighting. We're going to be applying a coat of paint from the top of the zenith, the highest point where light would hit, and we're going to be holding the model like this and spraying at a downward angle across the whole surface. So what we want is to have white coming down the middles here and still have some of that black down the edges. And we're doing that so that when we apply our blue paint, we get that natural gradient because of the opacity of the paint. We're also going to come back in here and put a little bit of white as well because we want to hit that with blue, and we also want to hit his shoulders, and then we also want to hit his helmet as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and lay down some white primer. As I did before, we're always going to start on the back of our hand here, make sure we get good paint flow, and because I just cleaned out the cup of our airbrush, it's possible black could be built up. So let's go ahead and spray a little bit. You can see it came out a little spidery and wet because there's still a bit of cleaning material or cleaning fluid in there, so I'll spray again. That looks much better than that. So by doing this, we were able to mess up the back of a glove here, see what we got here, which is what we want, before we went over to the model here. So let's go ahead and start laying down this paint. So we're going to hold this guy again at an angle, Instead of holding a downward angle like this I had on screen, I'm going to turn it sideways because it's going to be a little bit easier for me to get at it. So here we go. Nice thin coats, and we're going to be particularly paying attention right here because that's where we want to be laying down our blue later, right here, and then on his shoulders. So like I said, we're going to go with nice thin coats here. You don't have to rush this. Looks good to me. And we're going to come back here and try and focus more of this on the top edge versus down here. We're going to leave a little bit of a natural gradient. You can see as I got brighter towards the top. So we're going to flip this over and repeat it on the other side. With our Zenithal highlight down on this, it's time to transition over and apply the same effect to his helmet. So we're going to hold this upside down and spray hitting the top and try and leave some of those transitions on the side. We want the intensity to be more towards the top, so it's where the light would hit, where it'll be the brightest. See that transition? And then we're going to flip this over. We're also going to try and hit this edge here on the back of his fin. I'm starting off my hand and pulling in. It's a lot easier to control. And there we go. I think that's going to look pretty good when we come in to drop down our blues. With our white transitions now down across the model here, it's time to come in with our blue paints. We're going to be using Royal Blood and Lagoon Blue for this. Now, much like we did with our transition here from black to white, we want to apply some blue come across this model and want to leave some of that white showing so we can come in with the lighter blue from the top, again, just like we did with the white. Once we've got our blue colors down, we're going to come in with some masking so we can put some stripes across this and then spray down the yellow colors later and have these interesting, cool blue stripes across this Aeandon-themed Skyrunner. So on that note, let's go ahead and get some blue prepped and start spraying down some color. So we're going to be coming in here with our Minotaur Royal Blood and we'll be spraying the dark areas and leaving the light. So let's see what that's going to look like. Again, as always, spraying on the back of our hand here, making sure we're happy with the flow in the paint before we head over to the model. I think the consistency is looking fine, so let's go ahead and begin. With our Lagoon Blue now loaded up, we can come in and hit the high points on both of these surfaces. So we're going to come in here, and just like we did when we sprayed down the white primer, we're going to be focusing on the top portion here and try and leave that dark area so we get that nice transition. So let's go ahead and begin. Alright, I like that nice transition of blue there, it looks good. If you find you overdo it, you can always come back in with that dark blue and tighten it up a little bit, but I think in this case that looks pretty reasonable. So let's come over and hit the spots on the fins as well. And we're going to be trying to hit the outer edge and leave some of that dark in the recess. Just like so. I think that looks really good. Try and hit a little transition on this side, but we're spraying at an angle, so we're hitting here and the overspray is going past the model. There you go, so we get that little bit of blue on the back side. Let's go ahead and do this side while we're at it. Nice. And we'll transition over and hit the back of this fin as well. And there we go. I think the fins look nice. The hood's looking really nice and blue. And let's hit a little bit up here on his shoulders. I'm focusing right here on the edge because I want to leave some of the dark transitions into the recesses. There we go. I think that looks really good. The only thing we have left to do for the blue is to come in and spray those same colors on his helmet from the top. I'm going to hold him like this and spray down, trying to hit all the white areas and leave a lot of that dark area in the recess. Alright, now I'm going to spray a little bit from the side, trying to hit the edges here, just to make this transition a little bit more prominent. Okay, flip them over, do the same thing. I like the way the Skyrunner's blue helmet's looking so far. I think it's going to look really good with the yellow from the and color scheme. It's going to be a nice contrast next to that. So that being said, we're going to let this dry and move on to the next step, where we'll be doing a little bit of masking. Before we move on to the next step, I'd like to give you guys a word of caution and really encourage you to not be impatient and to allow the paints to dry before you move on. In this particular case, we are working very, very quickly, and I'm going to be moving on to applying some masking tape, and we're going to be peeling that off at a later step. And if you do not allow this to dry fully, when you go to peel up the masking tape, you could easily pull up the paint, and by the time you get to that point, you've got these cool transitions down, and then your model is ruined and you have to start over. And because it's not a Space Marine, you don't really want to weather this guy up. So I highly recommend using a hair dryer to speed up the drying process. Don't spray it across a model that's got a bunch of like super wet, watery paint. But once the airbrush paint is applied, that's, you know, basically a thin down layer and it's not pooled up, you're fine to hit it with that hair dryer and just let it speed up the drying process. So I really want to emphasize that because I've messed up many a model by being impatient and getting onto the masking step too quickly, and then by the time I find out I've messed up, it's too late. So that being said, we're going to be coming in with some masking tape from Tamiya, and we're going to be laying down some stripes across the surface here. So for that, let's just go ahead and get a piece of this, and we're going to lay it down across our cutting surface here, roughly straight. And we're going to get us a flat edge, and we're going to make a couple of strips of masking tape for this model. And I think that is looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and just follow that. And then we're going to come in and do one that's a little bit bigger. And that we don't need. In the trash it goes. So let's go ahead and peel up our medium piece here first, and find a good spot to put it across the model. Now, I highly recommend you take your masking tape before you use it and press it against a hoodie or a shirt or a pair of pants that you're wearing, and press it down and pull it up a couple of times before you put it on the model. What that's going to do is pull off some of the adhesive chemical or adhesive agent on the back of this and make it a little less tacky, which means it's less likely to peel up the paint we've laid down. And now we've got some of that adhesiveness off, we're going to come in and figure out the angle at which we want our stripe to be. And I'm kind of thinking we want it something like so. Seems pretty cool to me. Make sure we press that down. You want to be gentle, but you also want to be firm enough that you're getting in amongst all those details and getting a firm bond there. You know, you don't want to have a wrinkle in this and allow paint to get up under it, because then you're going to have some weird area on your model that's going to be kind of funky and messed up. So take your time with this. Get your masking on properly before you move on. So now that we've got that down, I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, and we're going to very carefully fold it a little bit, kind of around. And we've got this nice straight line between the armor plate and the actual jet bike, and we're just going to trace that natural recess with our X-Acto blade and peel off the masking. We'll do the same thing on this side, fold it over. There we go. And do a little slice, peel it up, and voila, we've got our first stripe. But that's not enough. We want to come in with this smaller one and place a second stripe. We want to try and get this as parallel as possible. I think that's looking pretty reasonable. There we go. Now we've got a little bit extra masking to do on the backs of the fins here, so we're going to go ahead and get that done, and then we'll address his shoulders. But let's get this and we'll be back. And just like that, we've got our masking done. Now I laid down some of that same Tamiya masking tape, pressed it firm here, and then basically traced the recesses with an X-Acto blade and got this nice crisp masking. Now we don't have to mask the helmet off here. All I have to do is make sure he's out of the way so he does not get hit with any overspray. But you may be thinking, what are we going to do about these shoulders? And for that, we're going to be coming in with a little bit of liquid masking from Winsor & Newton here. And when you apply this, I would highly recommend using a not very good paintbrush, because this stuff has a way of tearing up good brushes. So we're going to come in with, again, our not very good paintbrush. And we're basically going to apply a thin coat of this to the top of his shoulders. You don't want this to run down on his cloth because we're going to be applying airbrush to those cloth parts later. Like I said, this is very runny, so make sure you try and focus as best you can on his shoulders. And after you've got the first layer down, I highly recommend allowing that to dry and then coming back in and placing a second layer so that you can get a thicker amount of masking on there that's going to be a little bit easier for you to peel up when you're done. And it's also going to make sure that you don't miss anything and have any gaps in it, because right now it's kind of hard to tell if that's all over the whole surface. Like, is it getting good coverage? Because you can kind of see the colors through it. So I find that doing a second layer is the best course of action. With our liquid masking now dry enough, it's time to prep our Skyrunner for its next huge color, and that's going to be our yellow. Now, to prep for the yellow, we're going to be using two major things. We're going to be using the Stynylrez Brown Primer and the Stynylrez White. So just like we did with the blue, where we laid down the black and the Zenithal white from the top so we get these transitions from dark blue to light blue, we're going to be laying down brown in the shadows and white from the top so we can get a transition from a dark brownish yellow to a really bright yellow at the top. Another word of caution, because we have these masked areas down, you want to do really thin coats of paint here. If you don't, when you peel up this tape, you may actually tear the paint, or you may get these weird thick areas where the paint is. So be gentle, go slow, be patient, and get these nice thin coats so that when you peel up the masking, you get a nice transition across the surface of the model. And there we go. I think we've got all of our pre-shading done. Now it's time to grab our colors so we can lay down our yellow. The next color we're going to be using is Craven from Minotaur. And we're going to be coming in on this model and we're going to be spraying in all the dark areas here where the brown is. And we want to leave some of that transition into the white so we can spray our brighter yellow from the top. So just as we always do, let's spray on the back of our hand here. Make sure we got a consistency that we like. I think that's coming out well. And let's start spraying and focusing on the shadow areas. Again, we're going to come in with nice thin passes here. You can always come in and add more paint. You can't go back and add less, so be patient when you're going over these masked areas. Don't want it to pool up and be a mess. There's going to be some areas a little bit more difficult to get to. You can't just spray, so like in here, you're going to have to be a little bit tighter with it. That's fine. Just spray the center of it and kind of spiral and feather outwards. Same thing underneath there, just kind of spiral and feather. And by that I mean kind of rotating the airbrush around. Sprayed this side, but leaving that side a little bit more exposed so I can get the brighter yellow in there, get a nice gradient. And come back for more pass and make sure I've got that yellow applied on all the areas here that we want. Holding at an angle so that I'm hitting less of that white but still getting that overspray there where I want that shadow to be. And when you're working with airbrush, that's one thing that I would always try and encourage you guys to play with is the angle at which you're holding the model, because you can really manipulate where the paint falls by the way you hold it and spray and with the trajectory of the paint as it comes out. And as we get the sides of these fins, I think we've probably reasonably hit basically all the brown areas we want. So now it's time to come in and load up our brighter yellow for the highlight from the top. For the highlight portion of this, we're coming in with some Model Air medium yellow from Vallejo. And just like we did with the Zenithal highlights and the blue with the Lagoon blue from the top, we're going to be spraying all these white areas that are still exposed with this bright yellow. We want to get a nice transition between the bright yellow into the darker yellow and brown, so make sure you're spraying and focusing here and not so much down here. And with our paint now dry, it's time to come in and pull off the masking. For that, we are going to start by peeling up the liquid masking. We lay down on the shoulders here, so we're going to use a little pick tool, our sculpting tool, and gently come up under the edge. Trying not to scratch the paint, we just want to get it rolled up just a little bit so we can peel all that off. There we go. It looks like we had a little bit of yellow overspray where it wasn't quite there, so might be a good candidate for a little bit of an edge highlight to cover that up. Come in here and do the same thing on this side. Oh, we got it up. Go ahead and roll that off. As you can see, it's not quite super perfect. There's a little bit of yellow on this blue, but that makes these areas prime candidates for where we might want to do some edge highlights to cover up that yellow. But for the speed at which we were able to get those colors on here, I'm not displeased with that. Now that we've got the masking pulled off of that, it's time to come in for the awesome stuff and peel this masking off here. This is always my favorite part of working on a miniature because it's like Christmas. So we're getting to unwrap our gifts. So we're going to be very gentle here, trying not to scratch the paint. We just want to get a little lip here. Let's see how that masking turned out. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, look at that. Beautiful blue with that yellow. Looking super crisp, super nice. Oh, man. Love it. That's how you do it. That looks super sweet. It's going to be a very interesting, yet simple, subtle effect for an Iyanden Skyrunner. So all I have to do is get these peeled off as well, and then we'll be good to go. Oh, nice. Super crisp. Looks great. Let's peel this one up. Fantastic. Looking great. It's very quick, simple effect, fast and easy way to get your yellow and your blue down. Now we've got that finished, the only thing left for us to do is to start doing all the work by hand that we need to do because we're pretty much done with the airbrush. We might come in later, do a little bit of an airbrush effect on this blade, but other than that, the basic stuff has been completed on this. Now that we're finished with most of the airbrush work on this piece, it's time to move on to the next step. For that, we're going to be applying a little bit of a wash. I want to differentiate the cloth bits here from the armor and have a little bit of a breakup in the yellow. Now it looks like a lot of the samey, a lot of the same colors, and I think by applying a wash, we're going to darken that up and help differentiate. Now for that, we're going to be using a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to be thinning that down with some Liquitex matte varnish, which is very similar to Lamian Medium. I don't like to use straight washes most of the time, because I feel by thinning them you can add more subtle transitions and layer it up if you want to versus putting a straight wash on and then not being happy. You can always add more color, can't add less once it's already on. So let's go ahead and get that wash mixed up and lay it down. The wash mix that I've gone ahead and made up here is 3 parts Agrax Earthshade to 9 parts matte medium. So basically a 3-to-1. Now I find that creates a more subtle effect with the wash versus just outright hitting it with the brown. So we're going to come in with that wash and hit all of his robes. You want to prevent as much of the pooling as you can here. You want to make sure it's getting the areas you want it and not building up in areas you don't. Pretty simple stuff. Quite confident, a little bit of practice, all the things that I'm working on right now. You guys out there in YouTube land, my Patreon supporters, you can do this too. I've got confidence in you. If anything, you can do this even better than I am. Trying to do a tutorial and get it out quickly, and you guys taking your time might be able to get some better transitions and better effects than I am. Hopefully this serves as a good learning experience for you, a good tutorial so you can learn how to paint yellow in a different way. Let's come in here and get the undersides of his robes. And because his neck area is also yellow, we'll go ahead and hit that too. Perhaps our little Eldar fellow has yellow neck armor. Come down here. A little bit harder to get in here on this area. And you don't have to necessarily thin this wash if you want to darken up your mini a little bit more, but again, I really like being able to control the hue a little bit better, if that makes sense. With our wash now basically dry, it's time to come in and start highlighting the yellow. For that, we're going to be using Scale 75's Fantasy Games Lilith Yellow. Now we're going to be hitting all the high spots here and trying to really make this model pop. I think this bright yellow, kind of pale yellow, is going to add a nice contrast to the miniature. So let's get some of this down in our palette and get going. Now one recommendation I would make is that whenever possible, always use the side of your brush. You don't want to have to do highlights by drawing the edge highlight if you can help it. So by using the side of the brush, just like so, you can drag it gently across the edge of the model, get a nice crisp edge highlight without having to work too hard. As Bob Ross would say, 2 hairs and some air. Touch very gently, you don't want to push down hard, you don't want to mash the paint on, you just want it to lightly come off the paintbrush and leave it on the edge. And there we go. Now we are going to come in and do some of the manual highlights as well, but you want to do highlights with the side of the brush as best as possible. For one of the manual highlights, we're going to come in and we're going to follow the curvature of this here and just put a line kind of like so all the way down and kind of pull back and taper like that. We're going to come in, same thing here, and use the side of our brush to hit the highlights. Nice and easy, you can do this. This is super fast, super easy. And if you're going for speed painting, you can focus on all these hard edges for your highlights and skip the ones where you need to do a manual highlight to speed things up. But because I like doing some extra detail, I'll go in and usually do some manual highlights to spice it up, especially when it's like this and it's a character model. This guy deserves to look a little cooler than his brethren, because he's likely to be on the table far longer. Rule of cool. Model will be on table longer, model must look cooler. It's just the way it is. Well, maybe not for everyone, but it is for me. Now I'm going to come in and we're going to do the rest of the highlights on the bike, and then we'll start working on his robes, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Now with our edge highlights on the bike done, we can move on to the next steps. Before we do that though, I'd like to reiterate that when you're doing these highlights, whenever possible, always use the side of your brush. There's lots of hard edges that make it very easy to get nice crisp highlights when you do it that way. Now one of the things I will say is that I have put on a glove here, and that's because I've got highlights on these high points on the model, and I have a habit of fondling the model as I work on it, and I don't want to rub those off. Undoubtedly I probably will, but I want to mitigate some of that. So the next thing we need to do though is to address this guy's robes. Now he does not have highlights on them yet, and that's what we're going to tackle. So we're going to be looking for the high points here, the folds. So this right here is a good candidate, the fold right here at his knee. So we're going to get some of our Lilith yellow paint. We're going to follow these creases. Now this type of highlighting is not super easy to do with the edge of the brush, so you're going to have to kind of trace it and manually put these in here. But it's really going to make his robes pop if you take the time to do this. Nice, 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 nice. Now you can see how that alone is starting to help bring that out. So let's go ahead and get the fold that's under that one and see how that looks. Looks a little bit thin back here, so we add a little bit more paint. There we go. And try and bring that up to his knee. Looks like we might have a little bit of a fold there. Kind of just follow the curvature of his leg. There we go. So we're going to do that type of effect all over his robes, and it's really going to make him pop. So I'll show you guys a couple other things you can do when tackling robes like this. So at the bottom edge near his feet here, you've got a nice hard edge. So if you do want to hit that with a highlight, you can use the side of your brush, just like so. And then if you'd like to come in, you can grab this right here Alright, so we'll come up, just to give you guys one more example of doing this. I'm going to do this right here, using the side of the brush, doing the same thing. Tidy up with the a little bit more of a manual highlight there. And then there's not any drastic folds here that you can see, but you can come in and kind of imagine where they would be and add your own. So I feel like one might be here. We'll just kind of fade that down the back, and maybe one's right there. Also fade that down and kind of bring those folds over the edge there as well. And there you go. So we're going to replicate this effect all over his robes, and then we'll be back. Alright, and with those edge highlights applied to our robes, this guy is really coming to life very quickly. Now the next step for us to tackle is hitting some of the areas that are blue with an edge highlight. For that, we're going to come in with some Fenrisian Gray. First area I'd like to tackle with the Fenrisian Gray, so don't forget, is hitting this edge right here with that light blue so that it follows the same edge highlight that was applied with the yellow. So we come in, just trying to hit right on the edge. Just like that. Looks great. Now we're going to come in, we're going to try and hit these shoulder pads. And just like we did before, we're going to use the edge of our brush as best we can. And this is also serving to cover up some of the areas on the shoulder pads that are still yellow because of the liquid masking not getting all the way around. So we're helping bring that all together. When the edges of our shoulder pads now highlighted, I'm going to come in and start addressing these fins. Now I want these highlights to follow where the light source was we put. And sometimes it's not always going to be 100% the way the light would be hitting the model, but in this case we put the light edge here, so we're going to follow that. I also put a highlight down on the underside here, so we want this highlight to be opposite, because the light's hitting here and catching that, so it's going to hit here and catch this on the opposite side. So we're going to make this very easy. We're going to press down right at the corner and pull back. Press down, pull back, and repeat as necessary if you don't get enough paint off the first time or it seems a little bit not quite as intense as you would like. You can go in and add another application. Now that alone would probably be okay, but we're going to come in, get some paint on the side of our brush here, pull that down, angle the model in our brush, and drag it along the side here so we get that nice crisp highlight on that edge, just like so. And then we're going to do the same thing we did on the first highlight. Press down the corner, pull down. Press and pull, press and pull. And there we go. That fin is highlighted. Now all we have to do is do this one. And there we go. Our blue highlights on the actual bike are finished. But you may be wondering, Justin, where's his helmet? That would be an astute observation. And that is because he's over here, and we've got to get the edge highlights on this helmet as well. Now this should be a lot of fun. We're working on the face of the model here. Well, sort of. The helmet's covering his face, but you guys know what I mean. So we're going to come in, we got paint on the side of our brush here. Going to angle this helmet with the brush and try and drag the brush gently across the corner here of his helmet. That crisp highlight without really even having to work for it. Same thing here, come at an angle with the brush, use the side of it. Be slow and patient with that. Just make sure you're building up the highlights where you would like them to be. So we're going to come here, we're going to go down the back here. Now you'll notice I'm not edge highlighting everything. I'm trying to exaggerate a little bit, but I left the top portions of the crescent unhighlighted, so we've got some dark areas to go with those light areas. And we're going to turn them on his side here. We're going to drag it across the edge of that as well. So we're hitting all the areas that need to have that bright blue. go. So now as we rotate, that into that, that into that. It's very nice. Now I'm going to exaggerate one of the highlights here a little bit. I'm going to grab this corner right here. I'm going to put a highlight in a spot where you can't easily do one. I'm just going to press down, pull around the corner. There we go. Helps give a little definition to the fin. One subtle little highlight, add a little extra. And we're going to come in and we're going to hit the top of this area just for a little bit of a highlight. Just whoop, pull. Whoop, pull. There you go. And some of these are going to be a little exaggerated, not make as much sense, but we want it to pop. So we're going to flip this helmet just a little bit. We're going to come in, and we're going to hit this side as well. Rotate it around. This is why sub-assembly was so nice. We're able to single out the helmet and work on all the details we want at one time. Now I'm going to come in and following the same highlight we did here, when we put one down this side and came across, we're going to put a little bit of one on his helmet. Now I'm going to thin this down just a little bit so I can attempt to feather this highlight down the edge of his helmet here. So we're going to start at the peak, push down and pull, and as we pull back, and that's really thin. So we're going to get a little bit more paint at the top, pull down. There we go. I'm not going to put that one on that side, just this one side. Now let's come in with our paint here. Start working on these portions of his helmet. Get that corner right there. Pull it down a little bit. I got a little bit more there than I wanted, so I'll clean my paintbrush off. We're going to come in, try and feather that down. Get that where I want it. Alright, we're going to come in, hit his little Egyptian chin thingy. Corner and pull. There we go. I'm gonna hit the top of his little chin peaky deal. And this highlight's gonna be a little bit more exaggerated, but we're gonna put one down the side here. I think that's gonna look nice. There we go. Use the side of our brush here to work that chin. There we go. Now we'll put another one of those exaggerated highlights right here. Boop. Connect to his chin. Connecto Chino! Like this guy's got some Harry Potter painter. I don't know what kind of spell Execto, Painto, or Chino, or whatever I just said was, but in this case, we'll make it work. Justin, we're not painting Harry Potter minis, sir. We are painting Eldar, and we don't appreciate it. There's no Harry Potter craft world, so we're gonna need you to stop that. And I'm inclined to agree. Harry Potter would not hack it in the 40k universe. Or maybe he would. Maybe they would be psychers. Some weird psychers. You never know. Chaos may try to corrupt them. Turn those pesky wizards and... What? Do they even have warlocks? Is that a thing? I don't know. I'll turn those wizards against us. Alright. So it's looking really nice. I'm digging how that face is coming together. So now we're going to come in and hit one more exaggerated highlight. We're going to hit the very corner of his eyebrow plate here. Put a faint highlight right across that. I'm going to be real thin. Come down to the peak. Like that. Come to this side and do the same thing. And there we go. Let's make sure we got a little bit right there on the bottom of the beak. And I think that is looking quite nice. One thing we have left to do is really to do the face with the white and grayish color, and then do the peaks or the kind of runes and stuff on his helmet. And I may have spoke too soon. I spoke a little too soon. There's two more quick highlights I'd like to do. I'm noticing this little gizmo on the side of his helmet. I'd like to put a small highlight on the upper side of that as well. I think that'll look really nice right in there. Yeah, I really like that. That's really fancy. And we'll get the front of his thingamajig there. We'll do the same thing on this side. There we go. And we'll kind of taper that highlight back on this side as well. Nice. I like how that looks. I think he's coming together quite nicely, and that helmet should look really, really fancy with that model right there. What do you guys think? I'd like to encourage you at this moment to sound off in the comments below. If you're enjoying this tutorial, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the little bell so you get alerts when I put up new videos. And ultimately, if you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check my Patreon page. And all the contributions there help me to continue to produce content. And this video is brought to you by Wheels, Chris Oakes from the Garrison. He is one of my longtime commission supporters and longtime friends who's been super supportive of what I'm trying to do. And he came in clutch as one of my basically all-time, in every way, supporters, but in true Wheels fashion, came over to Patreon, made a big old pledge to one of my highest tiers, and this video could not have happened if not for his contribution. So big shout out to Wheels, Chris Oakes from the Garrison community, and I'd like to encourage you guys, if you'd like to see more of these videos, to check out that Patreon page. With that being said, we got a little bit more to do on this guy, so let's get to it. For the next step on our Skyrunner's face, we're going to be working with some grays and whites. For that, we're going to be using some Uthwin Gray. That's going to be our base layer here so that we can apply some white. And for the white, we're going to be using Cold White from Vallejo. Finally, once we get those down, we're going to come in with a little bit of contrast Apothecary White, and when that dries, we're going to come back in with some Cold White and do some highlights. You want to be very careful with this because you don't want to hit the areas you've already painted, and we're working in a very, very tight area, so be slow with this and be patient. Make sure you don't mess up all that hard work you've put in. It's okay if we get in the eye socket here. We're going to come and paint that later. Just make sure the layers you're applying are very thin. Thin your paints. Alright, with our gray now down, all we have to do is let that dry and we'll come in with some white. I'm going to make sure we come in and we want this white to be nice and thin. Do multiple coats if we need to. And come in and start applying a layer of this over our Uthwin Gray. Alright, with our white now applied, all we have to do is let that dry, and then we come in with a layer of our Apothecary White contrast paint over the top. It's important to shake this really well because the pigment has a way of pooling at the bottom. You want to shake until you don't have that buildup of pigment there. So I'm going to come in here with our Apothecary White, and the way I treat this is kind of like a wash. We're going to put this across this whole face, and if you get some on the blue, just mop it up as quickly as you can. But I like to treat this as, again, a gray wash, which is perfect over white. Now this is dry, I'm going to come in with a little bit more of our white, but this time very, very thin down, basically like a glaze, and just hit the top points one more time and try and feather that out and make it pop. Focusing on the areas where we want the white to be the most intense. So up under the eye, pulling down just a little bit, trying to stay away from where it fades to the back of the helmet, focusing on the front where the light might be hitting. Feather out the edge here. I'm going to come in with some of that pure white this time, not thin down. Get a little bit of an edge highlight on the underside of his eye. It's one of the benefits of using that contrast is it tints the white just enough that you can highlight it with white, which looks really great. And I think I want the front of his face to be a little bit more intense, so I am going to come back in with a little bit more of that thin down white and really focus right here in the front. Now this white's looking pretty good, but as an optional step, you can come in and do a little bit of black lining on the faceplate. I am going to try and do that today, but you can skip that. If you do decide to do it, I am going to be using FW ink black, thin down with a little bit of matte medium. So when you come in with this paint, you're going to want to be focusing on basically applying a deep shadow in the recess. So you want to use a very, very pointed brush, very small brush. This is my 000, and you're going to trace right there in the recess. Okay, now the tricky part's going to be getting down to his little pharaoh chin, that little Egyptian chin of his. because there's a curve down here. So you want to be very careful, be patient. Don't rush this. You don't want to mess up all your hard work. I really like how that's turning out. I think the black lining was well worth the effort. And if you guys are going to attempt to do this, I think that's a step that I would not skip if I could help. So now that we've got this model this far, it's time to move on to the next step. Now I've got a few other details here that we want to pick out, which namely would be the gems, doing the gold portions, and of course the lenses and gems on his helmet, as well as the gold bits here at the top. Now before we do that, however, we've still got the shaft, or the blade rather, of his spear here that we need to address. Because the way I want to paint this, we're going to go ahead and address this first, because I want to come in and paint the gold and things like that afterwards, and I don't want any overspray to get on any of the rest of the model. So for that, we're going to be masking off parts of this model so we can airbrush this and get a nice cool blue effect on the blade. Now for that, we're going to be using some aluminum foil. This is a trick I picked up from my time over at Death Ray Designs working with Austin. So what we're going to do here is we're going to prick a little hole in this, like so. Doesn't have to be crazy. And we're going to come in here. Actually, this might be a bit much. So let's trim this down just a smidge. It's a lovely noise, I know. Alright, so what we're looking to do here is to feed his spear, which is hard to see, through this gash. There we go. I promise you, all this noise will be worth it in the end. So now what we're going to do is fold this over. And very gently crimp off everything so we've only got this exposed. Now, I'm going to come in here and be particularly picky with what's blocked off, because I don't want any chance of any of that paint we're going to be spraying getting in. Now that we've masked off with some aluminum and this is looking like a big shiny ball of doom, it's time to come in and spray with our airbrush the blue colors we want on his blade. To achieve these effects, we're going to come in with a couple of paints. First of all, we are going to start off by laying down some Lagoon Blue across the whole surface, and then come in with a little hint of white on the high areas we want to keep, and then a little bit of the Royal Blood to hit the shadows. So let's go ahead and get started. With our Lagoon Blue loaded up, we're going to go ahead and coat the whole surface here. With our Lagoon Blue now dry, it's time to come in with a little bit of white and try and hit some of the spots we want to be bright. And I'm going to come in here, I'm going to focus on the edge of the blade here, maybe hit this corner back here, and then hit a little bit of the, whatever those little side small spine things are. So let's get started. There we go. I think that's really nice. So now it's time to come in with our darker blue and add a little bit of a shadow. With our Royal Blood now loaded up, we can come in here and hit in between the white areas and try and leave a little bit of that Lagoon Blue showing through and add a shadow. Alright, I like that. I think that's looking really nice for what you guys can see. I know this tinfoil is kind of all in the way here, but trust me, once we get finished, this is going to look great. Now I've gone ahead and replicated this transition effect we have on the top of the blade on the underside as well, but you're not going to see that as much on the model, so I'm not too worried about making that look super good. But currently where we are, we do need to work on this a little bit more to make it look a little better. So one of the things I like to do is to get this nice gradient on one side, take a piece of tape and cover that one side, and then do a gradient kind of in the opposite way on the other side. So we've got white on that tip and white here. So we want to have dark here, and then a light in the center, and that way we've got two kind of different reflective surfaces. For that, we're going to use a little bit of our Tamiya masking tape that we used earlier in this tutorial, and we're going to press this against our pants or our hoodie a couple of times, or shirt, like I had mentioned before. So press down, pull up, get a little bit of that tackiness off the back. And with that, we're going to come in and we're going to follow the curvature or the center line on that blade as best we can. Now, I'd like to emphasize here that it is really important to make sure this is completely dry before you do this, because you don't want to pull up paint when you come in to pull off the masking tape. That would be no bueno for anyone. And now that that's done, we can come in and mask off the opposite side of this blade on this side so that we get an opposite reflection there as well. For that, we've got another piece of tape. To help make the tape stick here, I'm going to come across the back with some areas that I'm not worried about masking, but just put a little piece of tape here, kind of fold it over on this side if you can. Just a brace for when we're airbrushing so we can help mitigate some of the wobble here. And because this top area is really important to have a nice clean transition, this is what we want to mask off. While they're masking now down though, it's time to move on to the next step. For that, we're going to come in and kind of do this in a reversed order, and we're going to lay down the light color here first. Now, the reason I've chose to lay down a white coat first is because it's going to be a little bit easier for us to come in and apply a gradient building into and taking away from that white versus putting all the dark in and then trying to put the white down the center and speckling. So let's go ahead and come in here and lay down some white. All right, I think that looks good. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on this side. Like I said, this side's not as important so long as we get a little bit of color down there. It's not the end of the world. All right, now we're going to let this dry, and we're going to come back in with some Lagoon Blue and start to build up that gradient. With our royal blood loaded up, we're going to come in and we're going to hit the tips here and apply a dark blue. We want to leave a little bit of that Lagoon Blue and definitely leave that white. With that dark blue now down, it's time to come in and peel off this masking. So be very careful here, and hopefully if we gave this enough time to dry, we won't get any peeling. Here we go, moment of truth. And there we go. Now if you like that transition, you could leave that the way it is, but I'm going to come in for one last step here and really pull this all together. For our final step here on our Singing Spear, which I think is what this is called for this guy, if not, our Eldar Spear of Stabby Stabby Doom, we've got one color left to apply, and that is going to be Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid from Minotaur. Now I have thinned this down just a little bit with some airbrush thinner. It's not required, but I like to apply this thin down a little bit because it's a little bit more of a subtle effect. So what we want to do is pull all these blues together. So we're going to come in with our airbrush here, spraying on the back of our hand first, make sure we're getting a good flow. I'm going to come in with our airbrush here and put a nice thin coat across the whole surface to tie it all together. And there we go. So those bright white areas are now bright blue, the blue areas are slightly darker blue, and the dark blues are dark blue. And one of the things you can do with this is you can play with the Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid by thinning it down to adjust the opacity of it so you get different transitions and gradients, or you can focus it specifically on the dark areas if you'd like so that the lighter areas pop a little bit more. So you could have faded this more to the white so it actually went into pure white if you wanted to, but I like this effect, and we've got some hand painting techniques we're going to apply to this later to make it pop even more. But for now, we're going to clean out our airbrush and prep for one final step that we're going to do to this so that we don't have any headaches later. One of the only downsides to the Ghost Tint line from Minotaur is that it has a tendency to bleed once it gets wet. That is, it'll reactivate and kind of start to blend with the colors you're working on or make a mess. So to help rectify that, we're going to come in with a little bit of matte varnish from Liquitex and apply that to the surface of our blade so we can seal it up so that when we're working on things later, we don't have any problems. Won't take very much of this, but we want to make sure we hit the whole surface. With our matte varnish now dry, it's time to peel off our masking here. This tinfoil of goodness. So it's going to make a bunch of noise, so let's get through this quickly. You do want to be careful because you don't want to mess up the model here. So there we go. Fold over. And there we go. So after a quick inspection, it looks like we don't have any overspray, and Operation Airbrushed Shining Spear is now complete. And with that, we can move on to the actual hand-painted steps that will make this look even better. For the hand-painted portions to enhance this blade, I'm going to come in with some pure white and do some edge highlights on this and add some glints. I find that doing this helps bring all of this together and really helps sell the effect of an interesting gleaming blade. So for that, I'm just going to be using some Vallejo cold white, but you can use any white you have, whatever you think will work good. In this case, this is what I've got on hand, so this is what I'm going to be using. Now, just like we did when we were applying the edge highlights to the rest of this miniature, we're going to use the side of our paintbrush as often as we can to get those crisp highlights. We're also going to be focusing on the areas where it's the brightest for this to be. We don't have to do the whole thing here. So let's go ahead and pull this across our thumb here and get a tip, get some of that excess off. Start coming in and dragging the side of our paintbrush on those edges. Now these edges aren't super crisp in terms of the actual model because they're kind of rounded. I like to shave off or sharpen, so to speak, some of my power weapons for my Space Marines so that this effect is easier to do. But in this case, I think we'll manage just fine. Now we're going to come in with some of that white paint and add a couple of glints here. So put a couple of little lines right here where the high points would be on this blade. Just like so. Come here and put a couple over here. Alright, now we're going to come around and we're going to put some down right in here where this high point or light sheen would be. Because we've got that white line going down the middle, we can kind of connect to that. And just like that, we've got our shining spear colored blue, got a nice looking transition and blade effect for our Skyrunner with minimal hassle, very speedy. I think that looks very, very cool. Now, the reason I did it in this order is because when we come in for the gold, I want to be able to do the gold bits and the gem here, and that needed to happen after the blade was done because doing the blade after that was already on would have been a nightmare. So sometimes when you hobby, you gotta hobby smart, not hobby harder, and by doing it in this order, we're able to save ourselves some time and a little bit of headache later. Now that we've got that process done, it's time to come in and start working on the gold parts that we need to do, the gems, and some of the brown areas like for the shaft of this handle and kind of for his waist wrap right here. For the next step, we're going to be coming in and applying the gold parts of our model here, and for that we're going to be using some Pro Acryl paint. Now if you're not familiar with them, you should check them out. This is from Slowfuse/Monument Hobbies, and this is good stuff. I really like the tops here because they open and close very quick. Whoops, shirting out some paint on me, but they help save paint and stop it from drying. The two paints we'll be using for the gold effects in this model will be Rich Gold and White Gold from Monument Hobbies. In addition to these, we'll also be using our Druchii Violet from Citadel, along with a little bit of matte varnish so that we can wash these and put some highlights on them. With that being said, we're going to be coming in with our Rich Gold first to lay down the base coats of our gold. And kind of similar to when we applied our edge highlights, we're going to load up our paintbrush here, and whenever possible, we're going to use the side of it to drag across these runes so that we can prevent any paint hitting areas we don't want it to. So let's come in here and start applying some paint to the runes on top of his speeder bike. Again, we're using the side of the brush as often as we can, try and prevent any paint getting down in areas we don't want it. And if it does, it's not the end of the world. We're not perfect. Do the best you can and keep on painting. And if you feel like this is a little bit too subtle or thin when it dries, you can come in and apply a second coat as you feel necessary. Now we're going to come in here, I'm going to apply some gold to this rune, gold to his chest here, and put a little bit of gold on the end of his staff, as well as right here and right where this rune would be. So we're going to go ahead and tackle that, and then we'll be back. With our gold now applied to all the areas that need it on our bike, as well as our helmet here, don't forget that we had that laying there on the side. We got the gold, initial layer of gold on that too. It's time to come in and apply our wash. Now for that I have put in 4 drops of Druchii Violet, 3 drops of our matte varnish, and 1 drop of Flow Aid for good measure. We're going to mix that up. Now you may think that washing gold with purple may seem weird, but by thinning it down we get this nice kind of blue-red sort of kind of hue, I guess, which might as well be purple because that's what we're talking about. There might be a more technical term for why this works the way it does, but I have found over the years that washing gold with purple or using a purple mixed with a little bit of brown makes for a really interesting, cool looking effect. Now when we apply this, we want to do this very sparingly, and we don't want it to bleed over crazy all over everything. So as you're applying this in strategic areas, sop up what you don't need so that you don't have purple absolutely everywhere. So let's come in here and start applying some of our wash. Go across the top here. So I think I've hit all the gold bits with the purple. Now with a clean brush, coming in here and we're going to sop up some of that wash off the sides. So we don't want to discolor everything. We just wanted to tint that gold and get a little bit of purple in the recesses. Now it's important to do this as you go, because if you apply a wash to everything and then try and come back and remove some, it'll already be dry and you'll be very angry because there's purple everywhere. With our wash now dry, you can definitely see how it has toned down that gold and given it a nice patina. I really like how that looks, and honestly you could stop here with the gold if you wanted to, but I think we're going to do a little bit extra here. Before we get to that, I will show you the helmet. Wash that as well. And for that next step, we're going to come in here and we're going to enhance this gold and bring a little bit of that sheen back and give it a little bit of a highlight. For that, we're going to be coming back in with our white gold and rich gold, but we're going to be mixing 2 parts rich gold to 1 part white. We're going to come back in here, just like we did with our initial batch with the side of our brush, but we're going to be focusing on the high points and trying to just kind of lighten it up. We don't have to hit everything, you just want to add a little bit of a sheen to some of the high points here. You'll notice I'm applying a little bit as I go and kind of building it back up. Don't want to go too heavy. Just want to get a little bit as we go. There we go. It looks very nice, very cool. All right. So let's come in here and we'll do the same effect on the gold above this one, the secondary rune as it might be. And that luster it adds is just fantastic. I find from this Pro Acro line, the metallics, which is what I own, I haven't bought a lot of the other paints from the line, but the metallics that I've used are fantastic. I absolutely love them. They're super easy to work with, and I get this really nice luster. As an alternative to the Pro Acro, however, if you've got access to some Vallejo golds that you like or metallics, those work fine as well. So I think that looks really good. I'm going to go ahead and do those same effects on the helmet so you guys can see what that'll look like. And then we'll transition over and complete that layer of gold on the rest of the model. So just like we did on the hood of the jet bike there, I'm going to come in here to the side of the brush and hit the high points of his rune here. If you find that you hit an area you don't want, get your paintbrush clean, and while the paint's still wet, come in here and try and sop it up as best you can. Get it off the model. There we go. I'm focusing on the bridge here of the runes because I feel like that's where the light is most likely probably going to be hitting. There we go. And there we go. Really like how that looks. That sheen looks really awesome. I dig it. And with that being done, we're going to go ahead and get these effects applied to all the other gold bits on that model, and then we'll be back for the next step. And just like that, I've gone ahead and applied that extra layer of gold here to add a little bit of luster. I think that is looking fantastic. The helmet's also looking pretty awesome, as you saw before. I really like it. And for one final step to really push this gold home, we're going to be coming back in with our white gold and rich gold mix, and we're going to be going 2 parts white gold to 1 part rich gold, and we're going to be hitting the extreme highlights, areas where there might be a really bright glint, the tips of some of these spines here, maybe the high points on his chest armor, some areas on the gems and the high points here where you can really see the luster. We're going to add just a little hint of a much brighter area to enhance that. So we're going to come in here with this mix. We're going to hit the extreme bright spot. So right here on the tip, right here down the middle, 2 little areas here. I'm gonna hit some of the edges of these spines, not the whole thing, but right there on the edge where the light would likely catch. A little bit here at the top. And you could skip this step if you want, but I like to add it because it adds just a little extra depth to your gold. So I really like how this is looking so far. I am going to go ahead and illustrate this on the helmet before I finish up the rest of the model, just so you guys can see what that'll look like. On the helmet, I'm focusing on the same areas we did before, trying to leave some of that other gold showing through, except I am going to put little dots right on the edges of these runes as well, just to help make them pop a little bit. Just takes a little dab. Little dab-a-roo. There we go. Little one right here. Rotate this guy around. Alright, I think this is looking really, really nice. Come down and we'll hit right there at the bottom. I think that'll look really, really stark. And then right here at the end, we're going to come straight down the middle of this, try and make the centerpiece very bright. There we go. I think it looks really nice and really sharp, and you can play with this gold as much as you like with the mix. And if you wanted to, you could even go into straight white gold instead of mixing it, but I like to keep things a little bit subtle. But if instead of mixing this 2-to-1 with the rich gold, you can get a much brighter silvery kind of gold and really push those highlights even more. But in this case, I like a little bit of subtlety with mine, so this is what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to go ahead and apply these effects to the rest of the gold on our jet bike, and I'll be back. Alright, so I've gone ahead and applied all those additional gold highlights, and I think Sky is looking pretty neat. Now the next step in line is to apply the red to all the gems and the runes on this model. For that, we're going to need a couple of colors. First, let's get the obvious one out of the way. We're going to need a little bit of Agrax Earth Shade. For the red colors we're going to apply, we're going to be using Corn Red, we're going to be using some Evil Sun Scarlet, and we're going to be following that up with a little Wild Rider Red, and finally, to tie that all together, we're going to be using our Cold White from Vallejo again. To get things started, we're going to work on this gem right here, and I'll show you guys how to achieve that. We're going to be coming in with our Corn Red. We're going to get that gem fully covered, and be particularly careful here. Go slow and be patient. You don't want to cover up the gold that you spent all that time working on previously. With our Corn Red that we applied to our gem now dry, as well as all the other gems on this bike, including the gems on this helmet, with all those dry, we can now come in for the next step. For that, we're going to be coming in with our Agrax Earth Shade, and we're going to apply a wash to all of these gems. When we apply this wash, we want to touch our paintbrush and drag downwards and allow it to pool in the bottom left corner. We want to do this on all of these so that the dark area is consistent across the whole model. Now this may be a little bit hard, it may not be perfect in every spot. We want to make sure that we try so that all of our light sources we apply later look right. So that being said, let's go ahead and grab some of our Agrax, and we'll come in here and apply some to this gem. So we're gonna dab down, pull down to the bottom here, Grab a little more here and just try and get it a little bit more dense at the bottom. And as you can see, we messed up and touched the blade, so we come in with our clean paintbrush and just sop that up as best we can. With our layer of Agrax Earthshade now dry, it's time to come in for the next step. For that, we're going to be using a little bit of glaze medium mixed with our initial color, which was corn red. With our corn red glaze mix, we're going to be coming in and targeting one side of each one of these gems and trying to aim for about 50 to 60% coverage in a crescent type motion. What this is going to allow us to do is build a gradient from dark red to light red, which is going to help give the illusion of a luster or a light source hitting our gems. So let me show you guys how to do that. Now I've gone ahead and gloved up for this step because I don't want to rub paint off the model, but if you're careful, you'll be just fine. Now I've loaded up my brush here, and I'm going to drag it across my thumb to get some excess paint out. And we're going to try and target this gem on the blade that we've been working on in the video so that we're consistent. And we're going to start at the top here, about halfway, drag it down, and we're going to exaggerate and kind of curve it at the bottom. There we go. And feel free to play around with this. Your mix of glaze medium to corn red may vary from mine, so this may take a couple of layers. And once that dries, it may not be quite as intense, so it may need an extra layer as well. With our corn red glaze mix now dry, you can really see the beginning stages of this gem coming together. We've got that dark red transitioning into the light red, and on this back gem back here, you can really see what we're going for. It looks really awesome. Now, with that finally down, it's time to come in with our next color, which is going to be Evil Sun Scarlet, and we've mixed that with some glaze medium as well. And we're going to come in and target the same bright red that we just laid down, but want to leave some of that showing through. So here, where we laid down about 50 or 60% of the gem with that lighter red, we're going to come in and we're going to fill in probably around the 40 to 30% of the gem with our Evil Sun Scarlet, and we're going to just trace the first line that we laid down. So let me show you guys what I mean. Just got a brush loaded up here, pull off some of the excess, and essentially what this is doing is helping to push the gradient, the transition between dark to light red. So we're going to come in here just like we did on the other one, starting at the top, pulling down, and really tracing that previous gem and trying to leave some of that previous color showing through. And as you can see, I'm pulling down and leaving more paint at the bottom so that we get more intensity right there, which is exactly what we want, because as we come in with the next two steps, we're going to be putting lighter and lighter layers of red down here in the corner, because that's where we want the intensity of this gradient or this transition to be. With our layer of Evil Sun Scarlet now applied, you can continue to see how that gradient is becoming more and more extreme, and getting that dark to light transition is really coming to life. Now, one of the things that I did that may or may not be a little subtle in here is I came in on this other corner on this gem and a little bit on this one and faded in just a touch of the lighter red and blended it out, just because I wanted that little extra sheen on that side, because the light kind of reflecting over a curved surface is a thing, obviously. But you don't have to do that. It's just a little extra thing I did, and because some of these gems are so darn small, it's really hard to get in there and do anything like that. It's really hard to be doing what we're doing as is. So if you're getting a nice transition from dark red to light red, you're already on par for what you need to be doing. Now, with that being said, we are going to push this a little bit further, and I want to give you guys a quick view here at exactly what I'm talking about on the paint palette. So this is our corn red, which was the first color that we washed Agrax over, and then we came back in and applied this as a glaze to the gems on the 50 to 60% side. Then we came in with our Evil Sun Scarlet, which has been mixed with some of that glaze medium as well. And then we hit the 40 to 30% amount of the gem, which is basically right inside where the corn red was. Now we're going to be coming in with our Wazdaka red, our Wild Rider red, which is a bit more of an orange color. Now, if you don't want that kind of pale orange color, you could come in with something a bit more extreme, like a Troll Slayer orange. It's really up to you. But in this case, that's what I chose to use. So we're going to go ahead and get into that now. Now, just like before, we're going to load up our paintbrush here and then pull some of it off on the back of our thumb here, just to get a nice tip. And then we're going to follow the curvature of the colors that we already applied to the gem, trying to make sure that we leave some of the previous colors exposed. Now, we want this application of orange to be a little bit wider than this smaller brush can provide. We don't want to go super duper thin, because we have one more step after this. We're going to come in with white, and we want to make sure we have enough room to put that thin line of white inside of this. So be cautious of applying this too thin, because you do want to have that little glint of white. Now with that little bit of rambling out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm not going quite all the way to the top now, coming about 65% up, 75% somewhere in there. Applying this orange line right across the bottom edge here. Just like so. I'm going to come in here and just add a little bit more at the bottom to increase some intensity. I think that's looking real nice. You can really see that makes the gem pop. With our Wild Water Red now applied, you can really see how these gems have come together, especially back here. It's super bright and intense, and if you want to get that same intensity on these, you could just come in and apply multiple layers until you've built up the color that you want. Now in this case, I'm pretty happy, but we do have a few extra steps to really bring these gems together and finish them off. For that, we're going to be coming in with some thin down white, and we're going to hit the extreme edges of all of these with a little bit of a white line to give a glint of like a sheen, and then put a couple dots on the opposite side. Now it's important when we do this that we focus on putting a very thin white line inside of this kind of orangey red area so that those other colors we spent all this time laboring over show through. So let's go ahead and do that. The paint we're going to be using in this step is Cold White from Vallejo. Now any white that you have would work just fine, but that's what I've got, and I've gone ahead and thinned that down for this step. So now we're going to be coming in with our very, very small brush here and be trying to target the bottom edge of these gems. So as always, I'm pulling the brush across my thumb to form a tip and get the excess paint off. And when we come in here on this, we're going to be trying to focus specifically on the previous colors and making sure they show through, and also focusing kind of on the bottom corner here and not going all the way to the top. As you can see here, by simply adding this white edge to the bottom of the gem, it really helps bring all the colors together and make it pop. That helps give it the sheen that it was lacking. Now, while we've got this one area of white down, there is one extra step that I like to apply with the white to really pull this all together and finish it off. For that, we come back in and we go on the opposite side of where we put that white edge, and we put a couple of very small dots. Just like so. And there you go. That really helps sell the gem effect. All right, with the white areas now applied to our gems, I think these are looking fantastic. Now, if you notice on the back one back here, I did add an extra little kind of line on the opposite side next to the two dots I applied because it looked pretty cool. You don't have to do that, but it's a nice little extra. And I also went ahead and applied the same edge highlight effects and gem effects to his helmet, which I think is looking pretty cool. And I followed similar types of theories and techniques on his lenses as well. Now those are a little bit hard to get into, so take your time and practice just like you would on all of these gems. Now to bring this piece completely together, we've got one final step to finish these gems. And for that, we're going to be coming in with a little bit of this right here, which is some high gloss varnish from Liquitex. You can use any kind of gloss varnish you like, but what we're going to do is apply that gloss varnish to all of these gems. So I'll go ahead and apply it to one of them and show you what I'm talking about. Just got our brush loaded up with a little bit of gloss varnish here. I'm gonna come in here and apply it to the top of this gem. I'm trying to be careful to not touch anything else but the gem, because we want this to be nice and shiny, and the gloss varnish helps sell the shiny gem effect that we were hand painting, except we have a little bit of gloss, so it reflects light as well. Now that we've got our gloss varnish applied, you can see these gems in their finished state. They've got a nice sheen, a nice luster to them. They look really, really good, especially under a light source where you can see the reflection, but it really helps sell them and bring them together. I also think it looks really good on his helmet. Got the same kind of luster and sheen. It looks fantastic. Now to finish this model up, we've got a few details left to pick out. We're going to start by addressing his boots, his waist wrap, which also has some like pouches and stuff hanging off of it, his gloves, the shaft of his weapon, and we might do a little something with the seat of his ride and maybe the console right here in front of him. So to get things started on all of the bits that we want to look brown and leathery, we're going to start out with some Monster Brown from Army Painter and lay down some coats on those areas. We're going to start off by hitting his boots with this. And be careful not to hit anything else on the model here. You don't want to mess up those details you spent all that time working on. Now, this leather color does look really bright right now, but I promise you, in a future step, it will get toned down quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this paint to the shaft of his weapon, his waist wrap, his gloves, and his other boot here, and then we'll be back. Alright, with our brown layers now down, it's time to come in with our next paint. We're going to be using Contrast Snakebite Leather from Citadel, and I've mixed this 2 parts contrast paint to 1 part matte varnish from Liquitex. You could use Lamy and medium, whatever you like, but I've done this to tone it down just a little bit, and we're going to come in here and we're going to apply this contrast paint to the leather bits. And you can see why I was saying that light brown that we used before was going to be toned down a lot, because we're coming in here with this slightly thinned down snakebite leather to shade it, and it really makes it pop. So we're going to go ahead and finish up hitting all the spots on this. Don't want it to be blotchy and weird, so get a nice even coat. Allow it to pool in areas that look natural to you. Alright, so we do have a lot of other areas to target with our leather paint look. So let's come over here and hit some of the other spots. I really like applying paints like this to pouches because they've got all those nice folds and the details on the model, and they pool, it allows the paint and the washes and so forth you might be using to pool in a very cool way. So you get a nice effect. The boots look fine, but this little pouch is going to show all those little details so much better than those tiny little elf feet he's got. Try and get as close to him as we can. Now you'll see that I've got a little bit of pooling up on his robe, so I've cleaned out the paintbrush and we're just going to sop that up as best we can. Come in here and try and do a little damage control to clean. So as with all things with painting, just be patient. Apply this carefully. Try not to mess up your previously applied layers and all the hard work that you've been doing before. With our snakebite leather contrast paint now dry, it's time to come in for the next step that'll tie all the leather areas together. For that, we're going to be using a little bit of the original base color, which was Monster Brown from Army Painter, and we're going to apply it across the leather areas as a bit of a highlight. In addition to highlighting the rest of the leather bits that are present on this model, we're also going to apply some edge highlights to the shaft of his weapon here. This will help give the illusion or the effect that it might be made out of wood. In hindsight, I might have painted the shaft of this a different color so that it was more distinguishable from his leather gloved hand here, but as Bob Ross would say, we make happy little accidents, and every day is a good day when you paint. And as this is my first tutorial for you guys that are my Patreon supporters, I think it looks pretty good, and I'm not too worried about making a small mistake there with color choice. So that being said, let's go ahead and transition over and start applying some of these highlights. I think we're going to start by targeting the pouch here, because I think that's going to show the highlights the best, and it'll give you guys an idea of what exactly we're going for. So we're going to hit all the hard edges on the top sides and pull these lines down. We don't want to hit all of the edges because you don't want it to just look like a highlighted mess. Hitting the areas where the light source is going to be hitting the most frequently is going to be the best. It's going to help sell the effect. Now, it's possible to do some exaggerated highlights that would be in areas where the light source is actually not hitting, and that's perfectly fine if it helps add to the piece. Now, if you have an edge highlight that goes awry like this one did, just come in with a clean paintbrush, try and blend it and feather it out a little bit. Don't stress too much. You should be having fun while you paint, not worrying. So come back in here, do some lines on the underside there. Looking good. And you can even do some like cross-hatch type of patterns on the leather if you want it to look like it's worn a little bit. Let's get this right here. I'll show you that effect on the flap of his little leather pouch here. Put a couple little lines, and then we'll drag some lines through. And there we go. I think that looks really good so far. We are going to come back in and apply those same types of highlights on the rest of the leather bits as well as the shaft of this weapon on this model. And remember, as I said before, just be patient, and if you have areas where you kind of mess up like I did right here, try and feather it out. But if it doesn't quite work, get some of your snakebite leather mix, get right next to that highlight, just put it right back into the shadow. Help bring it back together. While that's still wet, I'm just going to come in with my brush and kind of feather that out just a little bit. There we go. Remember, you should be having fun with this. Don't stress out. Have some fun and get some models painted. Just like that, we've got all the edge highlights on our leather. Our staff here, or the shaft of his shining spear, looks really good. And the things that we have left that we need to tackle on this are the kind of cushions he's sitting on, the engine, and the computer terminal in front of him. So first of all, we're going to address the engine and the cushions. I think those will look pretty good in black. Now we're going to go ahead and start off by painting down a little bit of administratum gray over those areas. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I'm going to come in with a little bit of the contrast black Templar, so we get a little bit of a transition on our black areas. So let's go ahead and paint the engine here. Should be straightforward. Thin down this administratum gray. And we just want to make sure that as we're applying this, we put it on thin and we don't hit any of the other areas that we've already painted. We don't want to mess up all of our hard work that we've spent on this model so far. We're going to allow this administratum gray to dry. If you find that it's gone on too thin and you need multiple layers, just allow it to dry and put on a second coat. But while that dries, we're going to come in and we're going to apply some gray to his padding here as well. With our administratum gray that we applied to the engines and the padding here for his seat now dry, it's time to come in with our contrast black Templar paint. Now we're going to put on a generous coat here on the engine and cover the whole surface. Should leave us with a nice little bit of gray showing through on the top edges, which is exactly what we wanted. Nice little bit of a gradient on these engines without having to work too hard for it. It's important to move quickly with this, but also be patient and don't touch parts of the model that you don't want to be black. You don't want to mess up your hard work, as I've said before a few times in this video. And while it's wet, you can still maneuver the contrast paint around until you're happy with the pooling, which is kind of what I'm doing here. So now we're going to come in and we're going to apply the same paint to the seat padding under our little warlock guy here. Very careful not to touch anything that we don't want to get black. If the contrast paint gets away from you, just clean your brush off and sop it up on the side as best you can there. Keep on working. With our black Templar contrast paint now dry, it's time to come in and hit some of these areas with a little bit of an edge highlight. For that, we're going to come back in with our administratum gray and hit some of the points on here that are still showing the gray through the black and really just push those to the next level. So let's come in here with a little bit of that gray paint and just hit the side of the seat here. And that's not quite as crisp as I want, so with a clean brush, I can come in and feather that out a little bit. And with that same gray paint, I'm going to put a couple of lines here on the top of this seat and do some like crosshatch kind of patterns to make it look like it's been scratched or worn just a little. It's a subtle effect, but it'll add a little something extra. Okay. There we go. And there we go. You can see using a little bit of edge highlight and working that contrast paint to push the shadows back in and trying to feather it can really give you some nice transitions and effects. For the back engine, however, I'm going to show you guys another technique to approach black with. And for that, we're going to be using a little bit of our long beard gray here. And we're going to do some targeted dry brushing on this back engine. For targeted dry brushing, I really like to use the Army Painter dry brushes. They're a little bit more expensive, but I like this nice beveled edge. And before we start touching the model, I'm going to use the back of my thumb here just to see what the consistency of that paint is. If it comes off too thick, then you know you might have too much. But it looks like we've got a good amount, so we're going to come in here and dry brush the edges of this. I'm pulling in a kind of left and right and downward motion, trying not to go down to up because I want the highlights to be more dense on the top sides of this where the light would actually be hitting. I think that looks really nice. If that looks too intense on your model, you can always come back in with a little bit of Nuln Oil or a little bit of that black Templar contrast paint and tone down areas until you get an effect that you like. But that's a really easy way to get some nice crisp highlights with a dry brush. It's not quite as crisp as this is, but this is a lot faster. So that's two different techniques for approaching getting the gray highlight on your black. With the black areas now done and the edge highlights applied, it's time to come in for the last area on this model that needs to be addressed with paint, and that is the little console in front of it. For that, we're going to be coming in with a little bit of intermediate green from Model Color Vallejo, along with a little bit of goblin green mixed about 1-to-1 with flat yellow for a highlight. We're also going to be using a little bit of Beal Tan green wash to shade it. So coming in with that intermediate green, I'm going to go ahead and lay down base coat first. It's going to be similar to the way that we painted our gems in the previous steps. Now that the intermediate green is dry, it's time to come in with that Beal Tan green wash. Now, just like our gems, we're going to apply this across the top here and try and pull it in a direction so that we get a nice gradient. So I think we're going to pull towards, we're going to make the pooling be down on the left side of the console here. Let's get that Beal Tan green in here, pull it to the left. And we're going to hit the little gizmos down here as well. With our wash now applied, all you have to do is allow that to dry, and then we can come in with our goblin green flat yellow mix and apply some highlights. With that green and yellow mix, we're going to come in here and highlight the edges of these panels. Try and brighten those up. Put a little glint right there across it. It looks a little bit subtle, so I'll come back across with another pass to lighten it up. And we're not spending quite as much time on the console here as we did the gems, but if you want to apply the paint in a similar fashion, you can do so. And here it got a little bit away from me, so we're gonna tidy that up a little bit. All right, with that now applied, you guessed it, the next step, just like with our gems, we're gonna come in with a little bit of white across the extreme edge. Try and leave some of that lighter green showing through. And if you really want to push this, you could probably come in with a little bit more of a green yellow first and then come in with this white, but I think we're nearing the end point for this model. We've spent plenty of time on it, and I think at this point this is going to be just fine. With our white highlight now applied and those dots down, I think the only thing left for us to do to bring this together is to apply a little bit of that gloss varnish, just like we did on the gems, and just put a coat right across the top so we get that nice sheen on our little buttons and so forth on our little Wind Rider, or whatever this guy's name is, on his console, so he can ride off into the sunset, or it's 40k, so probably into the teeth of some kind of demon or Tyranid, but he can ride into those in style. And there we go. I think after applying that little bit of gloss there to finish up that console, I think this piece is nearly complete. I know I've been saying that a lot throughout this tutorial, but I'm honestly serious this time. To finish this up, we've only got a few things left to do. And first and foremost, we gotta grab our glue. You know what that means? That means his head's getting ready to get put on, and then he can see. You can't be a farseer if you don't have a helmet. You can't see without a head, right? The headless Skyrunner, that's not very good. So we've gone ahead and pop this off with a stick. I'm gonna grab a little scrap piece of plastic I've got here, put a little dab of glue on there, because that's all we'll need. And then we'll come in, grab this guy, and we're gonna just gently dip that bottom into the glue. I didn't want to get a lot on there. And then we're gonna very gently slide that into place. What we want to do is, while it's still setting, make sure we've got a good angle for his head, while we can still angle it and make it look right. And I think I want it to be angled a little bit forward, like he's leaning in, tilting his head down. A little bit more. There we go. I think that looks fantastic. Look at that guy. He's ready. He's ready to slay some Tyranids, or totally try not to die to some Space Marines. And you may be wondering, what else might we have left to do? And honestly, all we got to do is get this tape off of his stand, and this bad boy is ready for the tabletop. So let's peel this off. And there we go. We've got the masking off of his clear rod, his little flight stand, and he is ready for the tabletop. I hope this has been enjoyable for you guys, and if you have any questions, concerns, thoughts, or suggestions, be sure to sound off in the comments below. I want to continue to provide quality content for you guys, and knowing what you guys might want to see or how I can improve these videos would be supremely helpful for me making them for you in the future. I'd like to thank you guys again for hanging out with me today and coming along with me on this tutorial journey. It's been a blast. I had a lot of fun filming this, and this is my first tutorial that I've been able to do because of the contributions of all of you from Patreon. This video specifically has been sponsored by Wheels, Chris Oakes from the Garrison. I'd like to thank you again for your contributions and your continued support and awesome friendship. You've always been there for me through thick and thin, commissions back in the day all the way until now. You're always supportive and you never stop. You're just you're such an awesome person, and I can't thank you enough. If you have any suggestions, critiques, or thoughts, please feel free to sound off in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say, what you think, how I can improve, or what other videos and things you'd like to see me work on in the future. Let's hear that. I spent a lot of time painting on Space Marines, and I'd like some suggestions from you to see what we could do. Now, this video as well was painted for someone special. While it may have been sponsored by Chris, Wheels from the Garrison again, this video was for our local former press ganger who used to run our War Machine stuff, and a close friend of mine that you may have seen in my battle reports, and it is Bob. If you'd like to see his reaction to receiving this miniature, please tune in after the credits and stuff have rolled, because hopefully I'll have at least a photo, maybe a little bit of footage of him being excited because this miniature was painted for him as a Christmas gift. Locally, they were doing a Christmas exchange, and one of the criteria for signing up was you had to agree to paint someone else's model, but you also had to list 3 models you might like to receive for Christmas and allow someone to pick one of those 3 that they could then paint for you, and then it was like a Secret Santa exchange. Well, unfortunately for the 2 armies I play, there wasn't anything I needed, or at least the one thing I did need was the Not Chaplain, whatever it is for Chaos, their version of a Chaplain. I don't have one. I could use it, but because I only had the 1 model that I really needed, I couldn't list 3, so I didn't sign up for the painting competition, or not competition, sorry, the painting exchange, but I did ultimately pick up a model to paint for him, and I'm really excited to give it to him. At the time you guys are seeing this, he will clearly have already seen it, especially if there's footage that follows this at the end of the video, but hopefully you guys will stick around and check that out. As always, if you haven't already, I encourage you to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ding the little bell wherever it is, so you get alerts when I put up new content. And if you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check out deathraydesigns.com using coupon code GETAMPED10. That'll let you save 10% on anything you buy over there, and a portion of that will go back to me, which will help me to continue to produce content for you, which I love to do. And if you haven't realized already from all the talks during the video here, this video again was brought to you guys by everyone from Patreon who's been supporting me, and if you'd like to jump in on that and help support the content, keep it flowing and see new stuff happen, make sure you check out Patreon. Here I've got a variety of tiers, even something as small as a couple of bucks to help fund some caffeine, some energy drinks, so I have some caffeine flowing during filming and editing. That's a very small pledge that you can do to help get the content flowing, but we do have some awesome rewards over there on the tiers and the levels and stuff for you, so I can give back to you in exchange for your support of helping me to do what I love. And again, I can't do this without you. Can't stress enough how much I love doing this, and I really look forward to doing some more videos. On that note, I'm going to stop rambling. If you hang out enough, you can notice that I do that a lot. But as always, keep on painting, roll those dice, and I'll catch you guys next time. This is Lord 17.
And Bob was here, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't watch this.
Yeah. You've seen those, I think.
I have seen those.
I was going to wrap them, but, you know, I didn't have time. I've been working a lot.
You have been working a lot.
Yeah. Don't break them. Bob is struggling with my lack of wrapping. Please say it's not broken.
It's not broken.
Yay!
Did you magnetize? No.
No, I broke the stand, Bob. It's broken.
I saw space. That's awesome.
I hope that's your faction.
Yes.
Are you happy? I hope you're happy. I spent a lot of time on that damn bottom. Alright. So I don't know how to switch this around, but we're gonna see if it zoomed in on my goofy face. I told you guys at the end of that video, as record Bob. There he is, with his happy model. So hopefully you'll see it in the battle report eventually.